Welcome to the Budget Mom YouTube channel. I'm Kamika Love from thebudgetmom.com, and today we are doing another real life budget. Now, our real life budgets are where you, a reader, submits your budget information and I show you how to organize and implement that budget into your life using my Budget by Paycheck method. Today we're going to be dealing with numbers and real information from a reader named Alexa. Now Alexa is dealing with a family size of 6, 4 kiddos and a husband. And you know, it's funny, every single time I write out or I do a reader's budget, one of the number one things that really stands out to me is I feel like not enough people are doing the first initial step of minusing your income or your expenses from your income. That is going to give you a really big either flashing red lights that something is wrong or something needs to be tweaked or something needs to be changed, or if you're in the green and everything is okie dokie. So that's the very first initial step when you first start a new budgeting method or process, taking your income, subtracting your expenses, and looking at what is left over. Now, what is left over? If there is money left over, you have to ask yourself, is that enough money to cover my financial goals that I'm wanting to achieve? Whether that's paying off debt, whether that's wanting to start a small sinking fund for Christmas, whether that's getting, bumping up your emergency fund. There has to be that extra income left over after paying your fixed expenses and your variable expenses to make progress towards the futures that we want. So that's the very first thing I noticed when I ran into Alexa's information is it's like that question you get is, Miko, I feel like I have enough income, but every single time, every single month I'm coming up short, or I find myself pulling from my emergency fund. I feel like because we're not financially aware of our starting points, income minus expenses, and you really can't make progress or move forward until you know that. So today I'm going to be walking you through not only her information, but I'm going to be giving Alexa a very big checklist that I want her to complete for October. These are not recommendations. These are really needs that need to happen in October in order for us, I feel like, to make the progress that Alexa is looking for, as well as her income, her debt, and her savings goals. So the first thing I always like to do is show you the steps for the Budget by Paycheck method. Now, every single time I always say, I'm gonna get something a lot prettier made to show the steps. So right now our handy dandy notepad is working just fine. So the first step in the Budget by Paycheck method is really analyzing and understanding your purpose and your why on this journey. I cannot say enough how important discovering your why and your emotional connection to your why, how important that is on your journey, because ultimately it's those emotions and that emotional personal connection to your why that's going to keep you motivated. It's the one thing in the back of your mind letting you know that giving up is not an option. So I like to give a little bit of background on Alexa, who she is, and her personal story and her why. So Alexa's why is, I want to get out of debt for my family and to purchase our forever home. So she has multiple components to her why. Now, she's a family of 6. Our goal is to purchase a forever home here in Texas. Our financial journey just keeps getting put off, and when I try to make a budget, I get stumped. My goal is to pay off my husband's credit card, my credit card, and our 2 cars to free up that money to purchase our forever home and to live debt-free, and eventually vacation with our family. I want to be able to buckle down, stick to a budget, and make changes that will last us a lifetime. Every time we have extra income, we mindlessly blow our money and left with zero at the end of the week, or must withdraw from our emergency savings. So this is a little bit of a backstory and Alexa's why she's really wanting to conquer her finances. Now, the next step in the Budget by Paycheck method is tracking and categorizing your spending. Now, for these real life budgets, I'm assuming that work is done based on the information that you give us. So the information that I ask my readers to provide can only be done if they are aware at least of their fixed expenses, their variable expenses, and where their dollars are going. So the next step, though, is identifying regular bills. Let's look at Alexa's bills. These are Alexa's bills. Now, anytime I do a real life budget, the first thing that we do when we are analyzing a reader's budget is we look at their income and we subtract their variable expenses and their fixed expenses. So here is Alexa's fixed monthly expenses. And here is, if we can get to it, this is her income. And these are her variable expenses. The first thing that we do is we look at their income. So right now, if we look at her income, they make a total of $4,994 a month, and that's as a couple with both of their paychecks. Now, Alexa is paid bi-weekly, $1,500. The husband is set more on a set pay schedule. He always gets paid on the 1st and the 15th, and he gets $997 a paycheck. So we take this income and we subtract it from her fixed expenses, which are right here, and her variable expenses. So when we first did this, the very first thing that we do here at the Budget Mom is we look at their income of $4,994. We subtract their fixed expenses and we subtract their variable expenses. Now, this is before I make any recommendations, any changes to the information that has been given to me. Right away, I had red flags. Now, in her personal story, she said, we're constantly pulling from our emergency fund. Anytime we get extra income, we kind of mindlessly blowing it. This is why. Because her fixed expenses plus her variable expenses, the things that she needs to live on, like groceries and gas. Now, granted, there's a couple of not necessity spending in her variable expenses, but with what she gave me, her total expenses equal $5,037. Look at the income. We're dealing with an income of $4,994. This tells me she is spending more than the income she has available. Automatic red flag is going up to me saying, hey, this means not only are we short on our expenses, but this leaves absolutely no wiggle room to pursue our financial goals or make progress on our debt. So with that being said, the first thing I need to look at then is her fixed expenses. Now, I want to say this and make this very clear. You can cut and reduce your expenses only so far. Okay, there's a limit to how far you can cut with your expenses. But your earning potential with your income is limitless. So I want to keep that in mind as we're going through the conversation of trying to work out a new system where her income is covering all of her expenses, but also giving us some wiggle room to get to her financial goals. So she listed out all of her bills, which when she gave it to us equals 4,317. And I know we have to reduce expenses because we're in the red right now every month. So here's what I suggest. Everything in blue I want to cut out. Sling TV, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, Spotify. Now, when I looked at her entertainment budget, there were a lot of things going on. She had Netflix, she had the Sling TV, she had the Amazon Prime, she had the Disney Plus, she had the Spotify. That's a lot going on. Let's reduce that. So I decided to cut out everything besides Netflix. Now remember, the changes that we're making, they're not permanent. They're temporary until we can get to a place where we can reduce some of these larger payments in her budget. I'm talking about the Honda payment, the Chevy payment, the credit card debt. If you look at that, these are huge expenses that are eating away a lot of the dollars that we are earning. So until we can reduce these, we're gonna have a hard time really finding that wiggle room, or until we can increase our income. Now, the reason I suggest reducing your fixed expenses and your expenses in general first is because the expenses that you do have, It's the easiest and quickest way to cut down where your dollars are going if they're going to all these different types of bills. It's the easiest and quickest way to make a change right away. It's a lot easier to work with what we have than to go out and get a second job or go out and make more money. So it is the first step. It's not the only step I recommend. With that being said, everything in orange, car insurance and her phone bill, seem a little high to me. Now, I don't know the ages of her kiddos, but I do know that they're all younger. Okay, they're not graduated and off to college. So I get that a lot of people can be sharing a phone plan. However, I do recommend that she call her car insurance company as well as her phone provider and say, hey, is there a more affordable option to what I have right now? It never hurts to ask. It never hurts to do that research because you might find something that is cheaper. So the blue ones we're cutting out completely. The orange ones, we're on a mission to get those reduced. Not cut out, but reduced. Now remember, when you are working with your fixed expenses, you have three choices. You can remove them, you can lower them, or you can keep them as is. That is the three things that you can do with your fixed expenses. So once again, blue we're cutting out, orange we're going to lower. And here are her variable expenses. When I looked at this, I thought to myself, is there an area that we can cut? Now remember, the Budget by Paycheck method was created to deter you from using a credit card. And what does that mean? It means that we better not be limiting ourselves so much to the fact where we can't stick to it. We want to make realistic reductions within our budget without cornering ourselves into a corner where we're forced to use a credit card. $400 a month for a family of 6 is wonderful. I did not see any reason to reduce that further. If we did, I feel like it'd be unrealistic. Gas is $120 a month, that's good. Now, where I did see and kind of think about kids, parents, and fun. Now, how they do it, parents is their allowance. $50 a month for the husband and wife to spend how they want. Kids, $100 allowance. Fun. Now, the reason I decided, just looking at the word fun, I would say, okay, get rid of it. We're so tight in our budget that we don't need a fun envelope. But knowing her situation, having 4 younger kids, not only that, not having a miscellaneous envelope in her budget for the things that do pop up, and let's be real, with 4 kids in life, things are gonna pop up. I wanted to keep that there so she could not only use it for fun activities, but miscellaneous purchases that come up within her life. So maybe rewording this category, not labeling it fun, but labeling it miscellaneous would be better within terminology within her budget. But I felt like these variable expenses did not need to be changed. If we reduce them further, I felt like it would be unrealistic to her situation, which would then corner her to use her credit cards if we reduce these any further. So that's her income, bills, and variable expenses. The next thing on, if we're looking at this, I want to have you look at her debt and her savings. The next one after identifying your regular bills and variable expenses, now remember, it's our variable expenses that we're going to be using for cash envelopes. But after that, it's working out a budget calendar. But before we get to the budget calendar, I want to talk about her debt and savings. Now, her debt, she currently has 5 of them. Luckily, no larger student loans, but with that being said, we are dealing with high balance, high interest credit cards. For instance, credit card number 1, we're dealing with almost a $10,000 balance at 17% interest. If it were me, I would call these 2 credit card companies. Now, 14% interest right now on a credit card is better than what most of us are seeing. Usually we see credit cards anywhere between 20 and 23%. So that's not bad. But this one at 17% was such a high balance. This is where I would call my credit card lender and say, hey, this is my personal situation. This interest rate and these minimum payments are killing me. What are my options? Do you have something or program set up where you can either reduce my interest rate for a certain period of time or help me with these minimum payments? You might be surprised by what they have to say, especially with right now dealing with this COVID pandemic. A lot of credit card issuers and companies have programs in place to help people who are dealing with financial hardship. So that being said, I always pay off my debt, paying it off with the highest interest rate first. So I follow the avalanche method approach. This is just me, okay? I know as a numbers person, it's gonna save me the most money on interest payments in the future, and it's even gonna shave a little bit time off my debt payoff journey. Some people do tackle their debt with the smallest balances first. It really boils down to what's going to keep you motivated, what makes you angry about your debt. I'm a numbers person, and it honestly makes me so mad that so much of my payment is going towards interest, which is why I recommend and use the avalanche method approach. So over here I have our debt priority. What priority are we gonna pay off our debt? Credit card number 1 first, credit card number 2 second, Chevy third, Honda fourth, and then this doctor bill is a medical balance that she is paying off $25 a month, currently no interest rate. So this is her debt and in what order I would pay it off. Her savings goals, this is where we get into trouble. These savings goals are going to be very, very hard to reach with the current situation that we have going on right now. And you'll see that when I walk you through the Budget by Paycheck Method calendar and our budgets. But she does want a 3 to 6 month emergency fund, $5,500. That being said, she currently has $1,000 saved, but she wants to work up to this goal. She currently also pays $25 a month for birthdays, car maintenance, $50 for vacation, and she wants to have savings established for Christmas this year, $800, which means she currently only has, after this month, which we're getting close to the end of the month, October and November to save that money. Maybe a little bit in December. That's a lot of money with such a tight budget to save. So this is why I'm saying, and I'm giving you a checklist on how we could even think about approaching this and reaching these goals. Let's look at how we would organize this into the Budget by Paycheck method. This is our October budget calendar. This is the 5th step in the Budget by Paycheck method. Now we already prioritized savings. We talked about her debt, which is steps 6 and 7 in the Budget by Paycheck method. Right now we're looking at step 5 and then our paycheck bill tracker, which is step 8. So let's talk about this very quickly. There's a lot of things going on. October, you're seeing a lot of different colors. Now I color code and use a highlighter method on my budget calendars. It tells me very quickly in a visual way what expenses I'm paying with what paycheck. Now, Budget by Paycheck method does not mean you live paycheck to paycheck. It means you are budgeting your money every single time you are paid. So the orange bills, I'm assuming that they paid from their September income. We're dealing with a husband's paycheck on the 1st and again on the 15th. Wife Alexa is getting paid on the 9th and the 23rd in October. Everything in blue we're paying with this paycheck. Everything in green we're paying with this paycheck, and so on. What you might notice though is they have a $1,600 rent payment. What does this look like when you are getting paid weekly and you are dealing with a major expense like that? You need to break that expense down into your weekly paychecks. So you can see with her rent here on the 25th, it has many different colors next to it. That's because with every single paycheck, we are setting money aside to pay her rent that is due on the 25th. So the one in blue correlates with the blue paycheck. And same with the green, same with the purple, same with the pink. So if we look and work through this, The paycheck that we're receiving on the 1st is going to cover all these bills in blue. But remember, a budget is not just paying the bills. It's also dealing with your variable expenses that fluctuate every month. Remember, our variable expenses look like this. So how I did this is this is the monthly amount she needs for all these things. I took these amounts and I divided it by 4. So with her variable expenses, we're giving her $100 for groceries, $30 for gas, $25 for kids, and then I'm just giving her the full monthly allowance for the parents and the fun with this first paycheck, which means we won't have to pay for those things in our budget for the rest of October. We're taking care of some sinking funds, car maintenance, birthdays, and Christmas. We're also going to be putting $31 to extra towards our credit card number 1. Remember, that's our first priority in our debt lineup. You make the minimum payments on all of your debt, but if you have any extra discretionary income, it should be put towards your number 1 priority, which is our credit card number 1. Remember, we're tackling this high interest, high balance credit card. $31 may not seem like a lot, but it's something. So that's how we're dealing with the first paycheck that we're going to receive on the 1st. But let's look at what happens when we get to the 9th. So we're getting the wife, Alexa, is getting paid for $1,500 on the 9th. We're going to cover these bills in green, and then we're going to set aside rent for $400. Remember, every single paycheck we are setting a little bit aside to pay for that big, huge, ginormous expense. We already took care of the fun and the parents' allowance for the month. We don't have to include that in our envelopes. So just groceries, kids, and gas. $54 extra is going towards Christmas. Remember, we're using a zero-based budget. Income minus our expenses needs to equal 0 at the end of the month. If we move to the paycheck on the 15th, which is right here for $9.97, the husband's paycheck again, we're paying daycare, internet, and once again, we are setting aside as much as we can for this rent payment. It's a huge expense in their budget. And then we're taking care of their variable expenses. When we get to October, the last paycheck in October, which is here in pink, we are finishing out putting aside money for a rent. So by October 23rd, we have enough money set aside to cover our rent payment. Now, people ask me, Miko, where should I set this money I'm setting aside for rent? That's up to you and how dedicated you are to not spending your money. If you know it's set aside for rent, you can leave it in your checking account and just let it sit there until you have to make your rent payment. I have some people who say, well, Miko, if it's in my checking account, I'll spend it. Well, then at that case, you actually need to pull that money out in cash and set that cash aside so you don't spend it. So we're paying these bills, but with the exception of we are using their last paycheck in October to cover a couple of payments that we need to make in November. Let's bring out our November budget calendar. Remember, our paycheck on the 23rd is hot pink. You can see that in November, the 2 hot pink bills that we're going to pay. We're taking care of the rest of their variable expenses, and what I decided to do with this paycheck is use the remaining extra discretionary income to put aside for a savings account for rent. If we move to our 11-1 bill tracker, we're dealing with this paycheck here on the 1st. We're covering all these ones in dark blue. Don't forget, we are also, once again, setting money aside for that big rent payment. Now, we're also going to be using for this rent payment the $35 that we put into savings from our 10/23 paycheck. The reason I recommend starting a savings account for that rent is because it is literally such a massive expense in their budget. It's killing them. And they essentially don't have enough money from each paycheck and the bills they have to pay and the variable expenses to pay their entire rent check even using all of our leftover income from each paycheck. We're gonna have to start saving ahead. Now we're gonna work through this process. You would work through the process. We have a paycheck bill tracker for the 15th, or for the 6th and the 15th. You would work through that process in the exact same way that we did back in October. Of course, our last paycheck in October is getting a little crazy. We are also starting again. We're using our last paycheck in October to cover December bills. Now let me talk to you about the recommendations, the things that really need to happen, and my October checklist that I want them to complete. All right, now it's time to get to the part where I speak some honest truth and give my recommendations. Now with Alexa's information, her budget, it's very apparent to me, not only are we working with a really restrictive, tight budget, it's gonna be hard to reach the goals, the immediate goals that she wants to reach, such as establishing a Christmas fund. If you notice when we did our budget walkthrough just now, we were only able to save $104 in November for Christmas. We weren't able to save, or in October, we weren't able to save anything in November, and we're not gonna be able to save anything in December. Couple of really huge, high obligations in our bills is keeping us from doing that. $104 for a family of 6 for Christmas. Is it doable? Absolutely. We make sacrifices right now for something better later. And that's kind of the motto that I had to establish for myself when I was working through my debt payoff journey. I was kind of in a similar situation. I didn't have any extra money in my budget to reach the immediate goals that I wanted for my life. Saving for Christmas. A lot of her sinking funds we were only able to save for once in October. So here's my recommendations. Her transportation costs are extremely high. And when I say transportation costs, I mean the loans and minimum payments she is making for her 2 cars. Now the Honda itself has $11,800 balance at 6%. That's a $405 monthly payment. Her Chevy payment is, the starting balance right now on that is $16,800 at a 6.5% interest rate. She's currently paying $386 a month. Those are 2 very high payments. My recommendation is that she honestly analyze her transportation costs and get those reduced. What does that look like? Could possibly mean selling a car, getting down to 1 vehicle. When I started thinking about that recommendation, I thought to myself, with 4 kiddos, could they do that with 1 car in their family? And because I don't know her and her husband's work situation, could they carpool? Could they make that work realistically in their lives? I can't answer that, but it's an option that they need to think about. The next thing is selling their car, maybe in a private sell, and getting something cheaper. Now, even with the money the budget that we're working with, they don't have anything saved up for a car. Now, usually I recommend buying your car with cash. Might not be a brand new car right off the lot, but it can be something durable and dependable. That's a lot less than the payments that we are looking at. But we really need to critically look at our transportation costs as far as the 2 vehicles that are right now established in her budget. The next recommendation I have is, even with making the drastic budget cuts and reductions that we made to her fixed expenses, it's not enough. Now, when we are dealing with a budget, there's 2 sides of the equation. There's your expenses and there's your income. And we have 2 options on how we can go ahead and tackle our future and the financial goals that we want to. We can reduce our expenses or we can increase our income. It's part of that equation. Like I mentioned before, with your expenses, those can only be cut so far. Okay, we still need money to live. We still need to pay our bills. We can only cut those so far. But on this side of the equation with your income, that's limitless for us. making more income and our potential to bring more income into our lives has a lot more potential. There's no limit to how high that can go. I don't know what Alexa and her husband do for jobs. I don't know the hours that they work. Are they working a normal 8 to 5 Monday through Friday? Well, then I would say take the opportunity of one of those partners getting a second job on the weekends. I know it sounds drastic, and I always hate to tell people to do that, especially if they're working with kiddos, because the last thing that you want to do is take away the one thing that is the most valuable thing in our life, and that's time. Time away from our children, because as a single mom and me working through this system myself, I get that anguish. I get that sadness. I get that hurt. It was the last thing that I wanted to do with my kiddo, my son. He was only 2 at the time when I started this journey, was to spend less time with him and more time away from him. But it's temporary. Now, I was lucky in my life to have photography skills where I could get into real estate photography and tote my son along with me on the weekends to do that, to bring in some extra income. Was it a lot? No. But $300 a month was huge towards the immediate savings goals that I needed to make in my life. So it's just some things that I want her to start thinking about. October checklist for Alexa. Call her car insurance provider. Can we get that lowered? Call her phone provider. What are our options with those plans? Can we get that lowered? Do we stay with our current phone provider, or is there a competitor out there that we can get our phones for cheaper? Third thing on the list is cutting out those expenses that I showed on her fixed expense tracker. The fourth thing is analyzing and reducing our transportation costs, and I'm giving them the whole month of October to figure out a plan for those high minimum payment car loan costs that are currently eating away so much of our discretionary income in our budget. So those are my recommendations and how I would organize and implement the Budget by Paycheck method into Alexa's life. If you found this video helpful, please like it and don't forget to subscribe. And we are recording. Cut out for the music. Cut out for the intro. Testing.